Today, we're going to be talking about everyday AI uses for researchers. So a little bit overview for general uses. So it can certainly be helpful for ideation. You know, from our group, we've had some people who've developed really useful tools that can help us to identify novel relationships. It can also be really helpful if you're trying to come up with acronyms or titles for projects. I've certainly done that. It usually doesn't quite get me there, but it gives me some more fuel for thought. And then for code, it can be really helpful, I think, more specifically for enhancement as opposed to writing from scratch. I haven't had a lot of success with writing code from scratch, but I do think it's very helpful for annotating code, refactoring code, checking for whether we're following the best practices for security and privacy, translating from one language to another, using it to understand someone else's code that we might not be familiar with. It's extremely helpful for that. And also getting ideas for validation and testing. It can also be really helpful for project management. So it can help develop templates, break down tasks, assign roles, help us with meeting agendas and summaries. And then this sort of touches on some of the things we've talked about in some of our previous meetings, but some documents that can be helpful, like a lab handbook, code of conduct, a mentee agreement, mentee-mentor agreement. And then also visual design. Certainly a lot of us are developing software, or maybe our lab would like to have a logo, so it can be very helpful for that. If you are using it for code, some of the types of prompts that I've found to be more successful are things like, can you tell me how to make this code more readable or efficient? Can you fix the formatting and styling? Can you recommend how I could make this more reproducible or dry? Those types of prompts are generally more successful for me than, can you write this specific type of code to solve this problem? And then from a text standpoint, it can be really helpful for locating specific text within really large documents or retrieving similar text across multiple documents. It can also be helpful for adjusting communication. So I've certainly used it a lot for shifting tone in an email, making it more professional, making it more casual, making it more accessible, shifting voice for writing drafts of letter of support. So we've definitely written a lot of drafts for these, and sometimes you want it to sound like different people, and it can be helpful for that. Adjusting your presentation to make sure that you're crafting it for the appropriate audience, and also checking for clarity and accessibility. It can also be really good for simplifying text if you have a word count limit. This is something that I recently encountered for a response to reviewers. Just be careful about what you're submitting and make sure that you're not releasing anything that you would want to keep private. Converting text into tables or other formats and creating README files and documentation, it can be very nice for that. If you're interested in more about this, we have a course about using AI for programming. Certainly there are co-pilots that are very helpful, and we don't touch on that as much because there were fewer around and available when we wrote this. But I think that a lot of the content still works for co-pilots as well. So check that out if you're interested. It's on our website. Now we're going to shift to talk a little bit about some considerations. Remember that AI is kind of like humans drawing dinosaurs based on bones alone. So this is something that an artist created, and you can see that if we don't have all the information, we can really go off in the wrong direction and not quite see the whole story. And so it's important to use very specific prompts. So as an example, can you improve this paragraph? It's okay. But if you ask how you want to be improved, maybe you want to make it more concise, maybe you want to specify an audience, that's better. So being specific and iterating can be really helpful. Some chatbots and tools allow for projects so that you can continue different contexts and have it remember what you're trying to work on, which can be really valuable. Also, we've found that typically asking AI to improve existing work often works better than starting with something from scratch. And really importantly, and we'll talk about this a lot, check everything. And the more substance and original thought that you provide, the more that you'll get back out from the product. So asking for a strategy of how to write code if you are trying to write code from scratch might be better than asking for the code itself, and also relying on some of your knowledge that you do. Again, testing and validating everything, making sure that your prompts are secure. Be careful about asking questions that might leak information that you would want to keep private or that would contain PHI. Check that you're not violating any data restrictions or licensing in terms of the responses that you do use. Are you using someone's code or materials that you're not supposed to be? That can be extremely difficult, but using the right chatbots and right tools can be the way to mitigate that. And of course, always having human review. So the major challenges are giving credit, because indeed some of these algorithms are using data and sources that they're not really supposed to. And data privacy, therefore, can also be tricky because some of them are using data that they didn't really have permission to use in the first place to train the model. There's also environmental impact. I've read some papers that are suggesting that one AI prompt, if it's not an intensive one, is about equivalent to 5 requests on Google. But if you're asking for a major task, that's obviously going to be using more computational resources. Using AI too much can degrade our trust in our own abilities and the abilities of other humans. And this can be really important for trainees who might experience a lack of confidence in starting in the field. And of course, there's also potential for bias, even in the way that we get simple responses for the change of an email tone. So it's important to be mindful of that. So to mitigate some of these issues, we can be transparent and specific about using AI. So that can help with credit and privacy issues. We can say which models we're using, and some models will tell you how they were trained and what data they use. So shop around for different models. You don't necessarily have to stick with ChatGPT, for example. Environmental impact. So there are some AI tools that are actually really transparent about how resources are being used, and they also describe their attempts to improve efficiency. So consider that as well. Again, also, if AI is used too much, it can cause a lack of trust in ourselves. So read the literature about this, about the limitations, about how humans are actually still spectacular supercomputers, and be sure to talk to your trainees and about how they're using AI and how that's changing how they reflect on themselves. And then in terms of bias, ask the chatbots to consider bias in their responses and challenge them when they fail. If you're interested in more about this, we also have a course related to this. There's a mini course inside of our AI for Decision Makers course, which has tips and prompts for both AI use and development.